This is Land of Havilah, Leviticus 25b. Regarding an Israelite who becomes poor, verse 35. If your brother has become poor and his hand can't support himself among you, then you shall uphold him. He shall live with you like an alien and a temporary resident. Comment, your poor brother shall live with you as an alien or temporary resident, meaning if you take in a poor Israelite, don't treat him as if he's under your authority like part of the household. Rather, treat him as a temporary resident in your home, as an alien, meaning not like he belongs to you. Furthermore, verse 36, take no interest from him or profit, but fear your God that your brother may live among you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. Comment, Yahweh keeps saying, I am Yahweh your God, to identify himself as the one who's giving these commandments, the same as we might sign a letter at the bottom. Coming up, a poor Israelite might wish to sell his services to another Israelite as an indentured servant. The poor man's a brother in the sense that he's a fellow Israelite. He's not property, verse 39. If your brother has grown poor among you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him to serve as a slave, as a hired servant, and as a temporary resident he shall be with you. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. Then he shall go out from you, he and his children with him, and shall return to his own family and to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him with harshness, but shall fear your God. Comment in verses 39 to 43, this is an Israelite who sold himself as an indentured servant. In other words, he pocketed what was probably a pretty large amount of money in exchange for an agreement that he would work it off as a full-time servant over a long period of time. This is more like the relationship between a boss and employee, and not so much like a master and slave. Yahweh already said in Exodus 21:3 that the Israelite must be released after 6 years of service at most, and now Yahweh adds an additional day of release in verse 40 we just read, that the Hebrew servant should be freed if the year of Jubilee rolls around. Coming up, the law concerning non-Israelite servants. An Israelite may purchase a non-Israelite as property to become permanent slaves. Verse 44. As for your male and your female slaves whom you may have of the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, of the children of the aliens who live among you, of them you may buy, and of their family who are with you, which they've conceived in your land, and they'll be your property. You may make them an inheritance for your children after you, to hold for a possession. Of them you may take slaves forever. But over your brothers, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with harshness. Comment in verse 44, you may purchase slaves of the surrounding nations, and in verse 45, you may purchase slaves from among the foreigners within your land. There's an important distinction here between two different Hebrew words that are both translated foreigner. There's Hebrew ger, which is a resident foreigner, a naturalized citizen, someone who's adopted Yahweh and adopted Israel as his home, having enough means to support himself, as opposed to a toshab, which is a poor foreigner with no means of support. So a foreigner could be a ger on the one hand or toshab on the other. Yahweh already said, quote, you shall have one kind of law for the ger as well as the native born, Leviticus 24:22, and quote, the ger with you shall be to you as the native born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you lived as gers in the land of Egypt, Leviticus 19:34. There's nothing in verses 45 to 46 we just read saying that the Israelites could capture and force anyone into slavery, but only that they could purchase foreign slaves. Such slaves purchased from other nations or of the foreigners among them were property of the purchaser in verse 45, slaves forever in verse 46, and could be passed on as property in the inheritance in verse 46. Coming up, a situation might arise such that a ger living in Israel might purchase an Israelite as an indentured servant. Verse 47. If an alien or temporary resident with you becomes rich and your brother beside him has grown poor and sells himself to the stranger or foreigner living among you or to a member of the stranger's family, after he's sold he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him. or his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any who's a close relative to him of his family may redeem him. Or if he's grown rich, he may redeem himself. He shall reckon with him who bought him from the year that he sold himself to the year of Jubilee. The price of his sale shall be according to the number of years. He shall be with him according to the time of a hired servant. Comment in verses 48 to 50, if an Israelite steps in with money to redeem his brother Israelite, the ger must accept the money and let the Israelite servant go free. In verse 50, there won't be any haggling over the price because it'll be set at whatever the ger paid for his Israelite servant, prorated against the time he has left on his contract, or until the 7th year of release, or until Jubilee. Just to be clear, verse 51, if there are yet many years, according to them he shall give back the price of his redemption out of the money that he was bought for. If there remain but a few years to the year of Jubilee, then he shall reckon with him. According to his years of service he shall give back the price of his redemption. As a servant hired year by year shall he be with him. He shall not rule with harshness over him in your sight. If he isn't redeemed by these means, then he shall be released in the year of Jubilee, he and his children with him. For to me the children of Israel are servants. They're my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. Comment in verse 54, if the Israelite belonging to a ger isn't redeemed, the ger must still release him at Jubilee, or even much sooner, as Yahweh already said in Exodus, and will say again in Deuteronomy, he must release him at the end of 6 years of service. In verse 55, though an Israelite may sell himself as an indentured servant, he's ultimately Yahweh's servant. Yahweh wants Israelites to be as free as possible to serve him. It was the same in the New Testament that if a Christian was a bondservant, he should use any opportunity he had to become free. Quote, were you called being a bondservant? Don't let that bother you, but if you get an opportunity to become free, use it. 1 Corinthians 7:21. And a Christian shouldn't enter indentured servitude if he could help it. Quote, you were bought with a price. Don't become bondservants of men. 1 Corinthians 7:23. We should keep ourselves as free as possible to serve God. Leviticus 26 is next at landofhavilah.net.